Hey guys, in this lesson, you're going to learn about the center and you're going to learn about space and what having more space means and how you can take advantage of that in your games. I'm going to be giving you 11 rules, 8 related to the center, 3 related to having more space. And this lesson is inspired from the book, The Amateur's Mind by the late Jeremy Silman. We're going through a series on the channel. This is lesson 3 in that series. And let's go ahead and just jump right in. As a beginner, one of the first things that you are taught in chess is that you should control the center of the board, particularly these 4 squares. And one of the good ways to do that, if possible, is to get 2 pawns in the center, bring out your knights, and now you have a great position. Now, of course, I'm just moving this person's rook back and forth. Black's going to do stuff. But if they let you, this is a pretty good start to the game. Now, I'm going to give you one more bonus tip, and I personally like to get 3 pawns in the center if possible, and then bring out your other knight. The reason for this is now, at any point in the future, if we try to push this d pawn forward, we have a lot of support from our pawns. And that's a really nice thing to have, okay? So if you can, I think you can get 3 pawns. That's a great start. And if you try to get 4 pawns, it's possible, but a lot of times this is a little bit much. You might be overextending if you're going to go with 4 pawns. We're going to talk more about this in just a second as we get through the rules, but you need your pieces to help your pawns. And now it's going to kind of be hard to do that when you have so many pawns. I'm not saying you can't do it, but you want to just be a little bit more cautious. Okay, so 3 pawns is kind of like a sweet spot. But of course, we have to talk about what if black makes better moves as well. Okay, so I'm going to jump over here. We're going to look at this example actually as we go through some of these rules. So this opening is called the Alekhines defense. White plays e4. Black immediately attacks it with their knight. And one of the best ways to approach this is to just push forward, gaining space, and attacking the knight. The knight moves, and now you can play d4. They attack you, and now you can play c4, attacking it again. And when they go black, you can actually play f4. This is called the 4 pawns attack. It's a legitimate opening. And it's not bad, but you do have to be careful, like I just said, of overextending, right? Because now you have to defend all these pawns that you're pushing forward, okay? So let's go ahead and just jump right in. Rule number 1. A full pawn center gives the owner more space and control of key squares. This one's pretty straightforward, but if you look at the position, white has a lot of options. They can move here, they can move this bishop here, they can bring out their knights wherever they want, they can bring out the queen to a lot of different places. They have more space because all these pawns have been pushed forward so far. There's just more squares on the board that they control or have access to. Black's position, on the other hand, you can see is kind of limited to these first 3 ranks. They don't have as many choices, so they have less space, okay? And then key squares, you can see how white is already controlling all these different squares just with their pawns, right? It's pretty good, okay? Rule number 2, owning the center is a responsibility. So like I said, just because you have these pawns here, that's not the end of the story. You have to maintain it, and you're going to have to do that by using these other pieces to support those pawns, because if you don't do that, black's going to eventually just start taking them, okay? As an example, let's say they go here, they're attacking. Let's say you're not paying attention, you move here. Oops, you're already at risk of losing a pawn. Now, there's some tactics here that I'm not going to get into where you could maybe save the position with d5, but the point is, those pawns are now liabilities. You have to keep an eye on them, right, at all times. Okay, let's keep going. Rule number 3, don't advance the center too early, okay? Every time you push pawns forward, they can no longer control certain squares. As an example, this square on e4, because both of these pawns have been pushed forward, you can't control it with a pawn. Now, you say, Nelson, that's not a big deal. I can use my knight, I can use my bishop, I can use my queen, and black doesn't even have access to that. What's the big deal? Well, there's not a big deal in this particular moment, but sometimes there is. And sometimes you have to be careful. I'm going to show you an example of a popular opening called the King's Indian defense. And one of the ideas here from black is that at some point, they're going to play the move e5. And if you push, you've now created a weakness on c5, and they're going to jump their knight in and start attacking you. Sorry. They're going to jump their knight in and start attacking you. And you can't easily chase this knight away because after you deal with the pawn here, they're going to play a5 and stop you. And this knight is very annoying. And that happened because you pushed your pawn so far forward. So you want to be careful with how quickly you push those pawns forward. Okay? Let me go back to my example here with the Alekhines defense. All right, let's keep going. Rule number 4. If your opponent has a big center, so let's flip the board for this one. And now pretend we're playing as black. If your opponent has a big center, you must attack it. You must attack it. You cannot just sit there forever for the entire duration of the game and just play passively. It's not going to end well for you. You have to try to attack it and see if you can, either win some pawns or create weaknesses that your pieces can jump into, something like that, right? So I'm going to actually go ahead and go through this game now with what happened here. So black played d takes e5, white recaptured. Black played knight c6. And notice, putting pressure on the center. They're doing exactly what they're supposed to do, right? White defends. They develop a piece. They play e6, bishop e7. They castle. And here is a very important moment. Black doesn't just sit back and do nothing. They play f6. They immediately are putting pressure on that big center, following the rule, right? White captures and bishop takes f6. Now we have 1, 2, 3 pieces attacking d4. It's defended 3 times, so white's fine, but black is putting pressure, and white has to be careful. All these pieces are doing something to help support the center, okay? So in this example, both sides have done what they're supposed to do. White got the big center. White supported the big center, developed their pieces nicely to protect those key pawns. And black has done a good job trying to attack them and trying to capture them, right? So both sides have played well. We have a relatively equal position, a slight advantage for white. Okay, I'm going to switch back to white's perspective here. White has a slight advantage. And the game continued queen d2, queen e8, rook d1, rook d8. Again, both players doing what they're supposed to do, putting pressure on the center, and white's defending, okay? The next rule is that if center pawns are traded, it opens files for the rook. This one is super obvious and basic, but we're going to just look at it quickly anyway. In the exchange variation of the French defense, where white immediately trades the e-pawns, you'll notice that the e-file opens up, which means rooks can very quickly and easily get access to the e-file. And so this is something you want to be thinking about, because if your king gets stuck in the center, or if you play a bad move like this, you might get pinned, and now you have all sorts of problems, okay? So just keep it in mind when center pawns are traded, those files are open for the rooks and the queens, and you have to be careful. You don't want your king to end up there. Rule number 6 is that if the center pawns become locked, play switches to the wings. Okay, so as an example, if white pushes by, black goes here. We could en passant, but if we don't, and we just play something like this, we now have a totally locked up center. And if you ever end up in a position like this, you can't attack in the center. How are you going to attack in the center? Unless you're going to do something crazy and sacrifice your bishop, right? What are you going to do? You can't move, you can't move, you can't move. Same thing for black. They can't move, they can't move, they can't move. So you have to either play here or here. Those are the only 2 options, right? So this leads to a totally different dynamic than if the center is wide open and pieces can move through the center. Okay, so you need to be aware of that slightly more advanced concept on how to exactly take advantage of that. But for now, just make sure you're at least paying attention to it. All right, the next rule is very, very important, and a lot of people don't know this one, but it's attack in the direction of your center pawn chain. Okay, let me say that again. You want to attack in the direction of your center pawn chain. In this position, black has a center pawn chain, which is pointed that way. Okay, it's pointed that way. So which way should black attack? In the direction of the pawn chain. That means you attack over here. This is where you should focus on. Why does it work out this way? You have extra space over here. You can easily play f5. You can bring your knight over. Maybe at some point you push the other pawn, you bring the other knight. It's going to be easier to organize your pieces in that side of the board than if you try to do it over here, okay? White's pawn structure is kind of pointed in both directions, so I guess you could make the argument that white could attack in either direction. But there's kind of a follow-up to that rule, and it's you want to put a pawn side by side your most advanced pawn. So what does that mean? In this position, side by side would be here, f5. We want to play f5. And white would want to play c5, getting a pawn side by side your most advanced pawn. It's going to help you as you try to attack in that section of the board, whether that's to take and open up the f file for your rook, whether that's to push the pawn again and create an even longer pawn chain in that direction. Either way, it's going to be good for black to attack this way, and white's going to try to probably do the same thing over here. All right, and then the last rule related to the center is that if the center is wide open, it means you can attack with your pieces. If not, you need to attack with your pawns. All right, so in this example, the center is relatively closed. The pieces aren't going to be able to easily get through the center, which means you're probably going to be needing to use your pawns. And we already talked about how black's probably going to do it over here. and white's probably going to do it over here. All right, so the next three rules are related to space. Okay, who has more space? So in this position, white has a ton of space. You can see how they have all this area of the board to work with. They can maneuver their knights around. They can move their bishops to different diagonals, the rooks to different files. Black, on the other hand, can hardly move. Like almost all of the pieces are stuck. They don't really have room to maneuver them, right? So black has a big problem. And you can see how the evaluation is clearly in white's favor, big time, right? Even though the material is equal, the space advantage is huge. So rule number one, when you have a space advantage, avoid exchanges. Okay, you don't want to just trade, because every time you trade pieces, it opens up squares on the board, which is going to help your opponent who has a cramped position. So don't trade, right? And then rule number two is the opposite of that. If you have less space, you want to trade. Trading is good because the more pieces you trade, the more squares you open up and it clears up your position. So in this position, you can see the eval bar highly in white's favor. Watch what happens as I start to trade some pieces. So I'm going to take one of white's knights off for one of black's knights. Okay, it's about the same. Let's do it again. Knight for knight. Okay, a little bit less. You see how it went from 4 to about 3. Let's do it again. Let's trade off some bishops. Okay, well that one, apparently that bishop was defending something on the king. Let me put that back. That's not a good example. Let's try these. Okay, it went down a little bit. Let's take off a pair of rooks. And there you go. It's going down even more. Let's take off the queens. And okay, now we just have an equal position, right? That's kind of the point that I was trying to make. In general, if you take a position that's very good for you because you have a huge space advantage and you just trade a bunch of pieces, you're going to gradually lose a fraction of that each time until you don't really have much of an advantage. Okay? The exception was when I removed the bishop, which was, I didn't actually see why, but tactically it was defending something. So that is the exception. If you trade off a particular piece that is guarding certain key squares, that's when it's not always going to follow that rule. Okay? And then the last rule of space is that a space advantage is permanent and you can take your time. You're not like in a rush to make use of that advantage. It's just going to be there for as long as you can maintain the space. Okay? If you compare that to a lead in development, well, lead in development is kind of temporary because once your opponent develops their pieces, your lead is gone. All right? So just something to keep in mind. All right, guys, now it's time for you to put your knowledge to the test and see what you've actually learned. So we're going to go through a game here. We're going to skip past the opening move till a certain moment. And I'm going to ask you something. Castles, bishop e7, d4, e6. Okay, this is the position. All right, here's where we have, it's white to play. Before I say too much, try to use the knowledge that you just have gained and figure out what would you play. White to move, what might make sense, what could potentially be a good plan. All right, if you had a chance to look at that. So in the game, the white player was worried about knight to c6. And they didn't want their queen to get attacked, so they moved it backwards. Not really a great move, because you could always move it backwards the next move as soon as the knight attacks you, or move it somewhere else. You don't have to move it just yet. So you don't want to panic from a threat that's very easy to deal with, okay? What would be good plans for white? Well, if you look at black's position, what do you notice? First of all, they don't have as much space, right? So I'm going to actually highlight it in red. This is kind of where black is controlling on the board. And I'm going to compare it to where white is controlling on the board primarily. Okay, we have these four. And just bear with me while I do this. I think it's going to make it very obvious what I'm trying to show you. And then I would say these are kind of up for grabs, right? Like I don't think white or black really has total control over that 5th rank. It's kind of anybody's game. So 4 to 3. Okay, so white has a space advantage. That is something that they have going for them. The other thing is 1, 2, 3, 4, and castling we consider as a developing move. So 5 developing moves to black's 3. Okay, so that is a temporary advantage, like I just said. It's going to go away as soon as black is able to finish their development. A couple more moves and they're going to be fine. So you might want to act relatively quickly. When I look at this position for black, the weakness that I see is d6. The d6 pawn is weak because no pawns can defend it. Now, yes, there's a bishop. Yes, there's a queen. But we could very easily attack that. Look at this d file, right? So a move like rook d1, let's say they castle, maybe followed by b3 and bishop a3, and all of a sudden we have a really nice target. Knight b5 if we need to add an attacker, maybe even knight here, and then at some point bring it over to e4. This is a great plan. Okay, so if you said attack the d6 pawn with rook d1 and b3, congratulations. The other plan that makes sense would be something like e4. Basically saying, look, I already have a nice space advantage, but I want to get one more pawn out there to gain even more control over d5, gain more control here, and really keep black cramped, right, and not let them out. So that's another good plan. But what white played in the game was really not ideal. They were afraid about this move that black didn't even make that move yet. And they moved early. And now black maybe can even change plans and jump to c5 and attack the queen again. And so not a good decision from white. Okay, let's go a few more moves. They played e4. This is a good move, right? We already talked about it. Continuing to keep the pressure on the center, gaining their, keeping control of their space advantage, right? Knight b to d7, bishop to e3. So black would like to go to c5, attacking the queen and attacking the pawn on e4. White decides bishop e3 is the only way to deal with it. Otherwise, they're going to lose a pawn. What do you guys think? Good move or bad move? All right, well, if you had a chance to think through that, it's actually a bad move. And it's this one is tricky because, okay, I like that you're developing a piece. I like that you're connecting your rooks. Those are good things. The problem is you're basically resigning yourself to the fact that, okay, now I have to give up my bishop for a knight. And you're opening up the position and giving the bishop pair to black. That is not a good deal, right? That is not a good deal. This should only be like a last resort. Like there's no other moves I have. This is the only thing I can do to deal with this knight. I have to do it, right? But there's actually an easier, better solution, knight to d4. All you're doing is letting this bishop support the pawn so that when knight c5 happens, you just move your queen. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So you defend the e4 pawn. You don't give up your bishop pair. And you move this knight to the center where it's very active. And you unleash your bishop to help support. You do a lot of good things. And white's position is better. Okay? So that's a little bit more advanced. So congratulations if you saw that. If not, hopefully you learned something. But you don't want to just give up the bishops for really no reason, right? Especially in an open position like that. Okay? So the game ended up going like this. Knight c5. Black actually captured this way. And you might say, wait a second, aren't they leaving this pawn as a weakness? Yes and no. Yes, they are, but they have the bishop defending it, and we don't have our dark squared bishop to attack it anymore, so it's going to be very difficult for us to really do anything with that, okay? And then over the next couple of moves, black plays queen b6, attacking here, rook f to d8, and all of a sudden black is really just in the driver's seat. His bishop is amazing, controlling all these things, putting pressure here. And I'll show you one more move here. e5. I would like you guys to pause and think about this. Good move or bad move for black? e5. Well, this is an interesting one. Because on one hand, black creates some weaknesses that they cannot really ever deal with, right? Like these squares now are permanently weak because the pawn is gone. So that's a plus for white, you might say. However, when you look at this position, black is attacking over here, right? They're trying to open things up for their rooks, their queen, create some targets over here, which is looking pretty nice. White has a queen, a knight, a rook over here, a bishop. Maybe this knight can come over. What white should be doing is trying to attack on the king side somehow, okay? And the move that might help them do that would be e5. Okay, for example, black plays a bad move like a3. If white is able to play e5 and start busting things open here, the bishop becomes more powerful. The knight jumps in. Sorry. The knight jumps in. This looks pretty good for white, right? So what black is doing, going back to this position, is saying, look, I'm going to give up these squares, but I'm going to permanently stop this idea. And I think that's actually a great move because now white's like, well, what do I do now? I mean, yes, you can put your knight on d5 if you want, but that doesn't help you with black's attack over here. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. This is a little bit more advanced. but I wanted to go ahead and mention it. Here, white makes a bad move, rook takes b3. They get a temporary attack on the queen, but now they have two isolated pawns, which are weaknesses. They're going to be easy targets for black, and black ended up getting into a great position. Okay, so I hope that example makes sense, and some of the things that we talked about with space, you could see in that example. All right, so the last example I'm going to show you is a game played by Bobby Fischer. He was playing with the white pieces. We're going to go through this game, and at certain moments, I'm going to pause, and I'm going to ask you what you would do, and then we're going to talk about what Fischer played and why, okay? So e4, e5, he played knight f3, and black played the Petrov defense, counterattacking the pawn. Fischer captured, black played d6, and then they captured the pawn. d4, bishop to e7, bishop to d3, attacking the knight, and black decided to go knight f6. Now, what would you play here as white? All right, if you had a chance to look at this, so there's a lot of good moves. Castling is pretty good. c4 is not a bad move. The move that Bobby Fischer played was h3. Now, this is a move that a lot of beginners would probably play instinctively because they just don't like dealing with pins, right? I don't want to deal with it. I'm just going to play h3. Fischer's idea is a little bit more than that, okay? And it has to do with the fact that if you think about black's position for a second, okay, they've developed the knight, they've developed the bishop. Obviously, they want a castle. And then they want to develop this bishop at some point. And where is that bishop going to go? Well, you can't go to f5 because white already has that diagonal. e6 is possible, but now you have to be careful because white does want to play c4 and d5 at some point. Might be a target, right? And then d7 is just super passive. So by process of elimination, bishop g4 seems like a super nice move for black and kind of like the only good square for this bishop. So Fischer is saying, okay, well, guess what? You can't do that. So yes, he doesn't want to deal with the pin, but it's a little bit more than that, right? And that's why you have to understand, like it's because this bishop doesn't have any other good options. If this bishop had like 3 places he could go to, they were all very good, I don't think he would be wasting his time doing this. But because it only has this one, that's why he's saying, yes, I'm going to play h3, okay? Castles, rook goes over to e8. c4, gaining space, which is a theme that we're going to see over the course of this game. He's slowly but surely taking away squares from black's pieces. Okay? Knight c6. Now, tricky question, so think carefully here. Should you play a3 to stop knight b4? Yes or no? All right, well, let me just first of all say Stockfish doesn't mind this move, so it's not a bad move, okay? But Fischer did not play it, and it's not the best move. And the reason is this is not a big deal for us. So the move that Fischer played was knight c3. So what if black would have played knight b4? What was Fischer going to do? Well, he has a very, very simple and easy and powerful solution. Bishop to b1. You just tuck the bishop back so the knight can't take it. Next move, or really whenever you want, you're going to play a3, chase the knight away, and your bishop's on a great diagonal. And if you ever want to move it again out later, you can, no problem. Or you can leave it there and put your queen in, create a battery to try to checkmate, whatever you want to do. You have a great solution. So there's no reason to waste time and play a3 when you have a super obvious and clear solution. Going back earlier, if white would have ignored this, okay, they play bishop g4. What are you going to do now? How are you going to deal with this? Are you really going to play h3 and g4 and open up your king? Probably not, right? Like, I don't know what you're going to do. This bishop's just going to be annoying now for a while, right? So it kind of made more sense here to play h3. And now, well, I have an easy solution. I don't need to worry about it. Right, do you guys see the difference? Because this is very confusing for a lot of people. They're like, well, should I play h3 or a3? Or maybe I will, maybe I won't. Like, you have to understand why you're playing those moves. Don't just like randomly make them, okay? So I hope that's clear. Fischer doesn't feel the need, plays knight c3. All right, so let's keep going. Black plays h6, rook e1, bishop f8, and here Fischer trades. Now, generally speaking, you have to be careful giving up control of a file like this. The reason Fischer does it is because he sees a very clear plan of bringing out the bishop, bringing the queen up, and bringing the rook over with the tempo, and he's going to get that control right back. Okay, so he's not worried about permanently losing control of the file, but that is something you have to think through carefully before you make a trade like that. A lot of times, the best thing to do is just leave the tension and play something else. But in this case, he wanted to proceed, and he saw how he could get control again. Bishop f4. Queen d2, like I mentioned, getting ready to play rook e1. Queen c8. Now, I would like you to pause and think about this. Okay, just think about that and come to a conclusion. All right, go ahead. All right, you had a chance to look at that. Hopefully, you thought about the sacrifice. And what you should have concluded was that it's not a big deal. We don't have to worry. Okay? There are two big problems that a lot of beginners will make. Number one is you don't even think about it, anything. Like you wouldn't even like consider it. You're like, oh, I didn't even look at that. Like, didn't know there was even that possibility. That's one mistake. The other mistake is that you are overly concerned and you kind of panic about something that's not even a big deal. You might see this and go, oh, he's gonna sack. He's gonna open up my king. I'm gonna get checkmated. I better do something to defend that. Some random move like king h2 or something, right? That's the wrong approach. Okay. What you need to think about is like, is it really a danger, or do I have a clear way to defend? And in this position, I think you can just play bishop g3. Just block off the queen. Even if the knight comes here, is that really threatening anything? Like, no, that's not even a threat. I mean, this is defended 2 times. You don't have to worry about that. There's nothing happening here. You just keep on playing. Just keep bringing in your pieces, attacking stuff. You can even come over here and trap the queen in this position. You're totally fine, okay? So what you needed to understand is, yes, there was a potential sacrifice, but no, it was not dangerous, okay? And that's kind of the logic that you want to have. Don't panic, but also don't completely ignore it. Like, you have to at least look at it, okay? So I wanted to just point that out, all right? So Fischer plays d5, and he's gaining space, attacking the knight. Yes, he's giving up a couple of squares, but he's got those controlled right here. And this one, the knight can't get there right away. It's going to take a couple of moves for that knight to actually end up there, okay? So he gains some space. Knight to b4, and now this is kind of a critical moment. What move would you play in this position? All right, well, if you had a chance to look at that, hopefully you identified the fact that I should probably not lose my bishop to the knight, right? Bishops are better than knights, especially in a position like this where the bishop is very powerful. You don't want to let that knight just take it. So what are the options? Well, we talked about bishop to b1 earlier, but now this is not the move that you want to play. It's not awful, but you're blocking your rook, which is not what you want. You don't want to trap your rook in the corner if you don't have to, right? Yes, you could play a3 next, and then you could move your bishop out, and eventually you'll get the rook into the game, but that's going to be very, very slow. Bishop f1, okay, you get away from the knight. Not awful, but now you don't have that aggressive bishop anymore, right? And if black wants to, they can actually take control of that diagonal and start putting pressure on you. That's not ideal either. But how else do you save your bishop? Fischer comes up with a really nice move, knight to e4. Now, you might be thinking, Nelson, he doesn't save his bishop. Black can still take it, right? And you're right, kind of. Black can, but then he allows this in-between move. Knight takes f6 check, and he takes back. So yes, he got the bishop, but at what cost? Well, look at this. Kingside is obliterated. These pawns are awful. And now Fischer has a very clear way to attack. You can invade on the g file. The rook can come over, or the queen can come over, and these guys are just long-term weaknesses. And it's a nice position for white. So this idea of, I don't want to lose my bishop. How can I do it? Let me move a piece forward to create another threat. Oh, and by the way, which will happen in the game, if black takes me, well, now I've saved my bishop. I'm not going to get captured, and it stays on an aggressive position. This idea of having this main goal of like, okay, I want to save my bishop. I don't want to lose it to the knight. How do I do that? But finding a tactic inside of the position, it's almost like a game within a game. Those are the kind of moves that will skyrocket your rating. Like when things start to click and you're able to start finding those ideas, that's when you get to the next level, right? And I'm not saying this is easy, okay? So please, if you didn't see that move, like, don't feel bad. But I just want to point out, like, those are the things that really strong players are very good at, right? They find those little tricks in the middle of the position that accomplish what they want to accomplish, but in a way that you didn't even think was possible, right? I think probably most people watching this video would not have considered knight e4 as a potential way to save your bishop, right? So I hope that makes sense. Very, very nice idea by Fischer there. And in the game, like I said, black actually captured it. He recaptured. Oh, and by the way, the knight is under attack now, so black plays knight a6. Knight to d4. Knight to c5. Again, the bishop's under attack. This one is easy. He simply drops it back to c2. And a5, what you'll notice about the next couple of moves is that Fischer doesn't panic. He doesn't feel like, okay, I have to attack immediately by like throwing my pawns forward, or I have to do something crazy like sacrificing my bishop. He just realizes, no, I have a lead in space. I have more room to work with. Black is kind of cramped, doesn't have a lot of options. I'm just going to take my time. I'm going to bring my last piece into the game. I'm going to bring it up. I'm going to bring it over. And he just slowly but surely, he just keeps attacking. And he actually has an immediate threat now. This pawn is pinned, so he's threatening to just take it. So black sidesteps. And now knight f3, very powerful move, getting ready to either go here with his queen or maybe even bring the bishop back around and just keep attacking. And after queen e7, queen d4, and white was basically winning. Okay, there's just so many threats, and it's basically over. Okay, so really nice example of how Fischer, I mean, it started way back on when he played h3. He started to just take over these little squares from black's pieces. He took over this one. c4, he took over this one, right? He traded here and then took over the e file, right? Or he would have. Black moved ahead of time. Then d5 takes over a few more squares, right? Has this really nice tactic to kind of defend his bishop in a weird way, but he keeps the pressure. By the way, I forgot to mention, he traded off a piece on the queen side for a piece on the king side, which makes black's king weaker, right? This knight wasn't doing a lot. This knight was a great defender. He traded those off, and that's when his attack became more powerful. So lots of little things that just stacked on top of each other will ultimately lead to that winning position at the end. Okay, guys, I hope this was helpful. The center and space, some of these concepts can be pretty complicated, but hopefully you learned something from this. I'll see you next time as we continue going through this book, The Amateur's Mind. Thank you, guys, and as always, stay sharp, play smart, and take care.